Looking closer at the initiative table, it's important to understand how the initiative table is going to get handled and how the current turn indicator, this piece right over here, is going to move along the initiative table. As said before, first the units are going to be taking their turn, then the settlements, then the war camps, and then we move over to unit recall, followed by the end of round rules and events. So the current turn indicator is going to be moving from top to bottom, left to right. And it's going to skip over anything that's either empty or disabled. So for example, all of the ones column has no units within their respective space. So we just continue on until we hit the first enabled unit, which will be Anazandra Soul Judiciary on the 2 slot of the initiative table. That player will then take their respective turn moving and taking an action with Anna. Once they are done, we then move on to the next available unit as indicated on the unit section of the initiative table. Once again, top to bottom, left to right. So next would be Colette, followed by Tangus. Once all units have taken their respective turn, the current turn indicator is then going to move into the settlements section of the initiative table. This is where each settlement is going to take their turn, starting with settlement 1, then settlement 2, etc. Now, the first round, there won't be any settlements that are going to be under the protection of another player. However, there can be some players that will have their Warbanner present because they assaulted a settlement, and at which point that particular settlement will be defending itself and attacking back to whichever units that are within that settlement's borders. More on that later. But for now, we just review whether there is a protecting player or an assaulting player within the Warbanner ID or Protection ID column. If there are none present, we are effectively skipping that settlement's turn because there's nothing for that settlement to do. Settlements are neutral components in the game. No player owns them. You can only effectively attack them or be its protector, and if you are its protector, you temporarily control its abilities. Now, once all the settlements are done, we move on to the bottom of the settlements section and over to the right, handling each of the settlement events in order. First will be repairing of the settlements. If there are any damage dice on the settlement from a result of being assaulted, this is when they would repair a little bit of their respective damage. Next would be collect. So if there was a player that was protecting a settlement, this is the moment where they would collect gold from that settlement. The last one is growth. So unless a settlement is under assault, all the settlements are going to be growing and gaining 1 growth token. And something to note, for every 3 growth tokens that a settlement acquires, it will be exchanged for 1 level token, which will be represented in this column here for both growth and level. Those tokens get placed on each of their respective slots. Once each of these events are complete, we then move back to the top of the settlements section and proceed onto the war camp section. Similar to the settlements, we're going to go from top to bottom, left to right, and each war camp is going to be owned by their respective player, and player 1's war camp will always be first, followed by player 2, then player 3, and so on. And just with everything else, when any in-game object is taking their turn, the current turn indicator is going to be placed directly on top so that we know whose turn it currently is. So first is player 1's war camp. Once their turn is done, it will be player 2's war camp, then player 3, and so on. Once all the war camps have taken their turn, we move on to the war camp events on the very bottom of the section, starting with repair. So if there was any accumulated damage within the defensive point column beside each respective war camp, this is where they would repair some of their accumulated damage. This is similar to what happens with the settlements. Next is collect, which is also similar to the settlements, except that collecting gold from war camps is always going to be guaranteed. You don't have to protect a war camp. This is going to be income that will always happen and will also improve as your war camps will level up and gain additional power. I'd like to go over the level column. So as you're playing through the game, you're going to be able to acquire war tokens that will be placed beside your war camp. And for every 3 war tokens you collect, you'll gain 1 level token. So you're converting the 3 war tokens into 1 level token. And the level token goes in the same location just beside your war camp. As your war camp levels up, its offensive, defensive capabilities will improve, as well as the amount of gold that you can collect at the end of the war camp's respective turn handling. Next up on the initiative table is the unit recall section. So during the unit recall, if there were any pieces present here, this is when we would respectively have each unit's recall turn handled by having their owning player decide whether they want to have their unit cancel their recall or proceed with a recall. And for each unit that does successfully recall, the owning player is going to get some degree of a refund in the form of gold relative to that unit and their deployment costs and whether or not they had any loyalty on them at the moment that they're recalled. If they instead choose to cancel that unit's recall, that piece will return back to the units section in their respective initiative score column. But for now, we're just going to continue on to the end of round rules and events. In this last section of the initiative table, we're going to be moving the piece top to bottom until it reaches the bottom right corner of the initiative table, which is this slot here titled Start New Round. But before getting that, the first thing that occurs is moving the dragon. And this is when we switch over from this section over here and moving the current turn indicator to then moving the dragon on the events track, which is right here. With the move dragon event, we're going to take this piece and move it just 1 space over to the right. Now, the first event that occurs on the events track is a war speech. The way a war speech works is each player, starting from player 1, then player 2, then player 3, they must decide whether they want 1 leadership for their warlord or 1 loyalty for all of their currently deployed units. Once each player has decided, the move dragon has finished and we can proceed onwards to the next end of round rule and event. Before continuing with end of round rules and events, I will cover the remaining events that occur on the events track. First up is Persuade. When a Persuade event occurs, this is when each player, starting with player 1, is going to be able to attempt to persuade an enemy unit that is within their warlord's presence, spending up to 2 leadership to do so. This is a chance where players can convince an enemy unit to leave their existing army and join theirs in turn. The next event is Influence the Public. Influence the Public is an important event where players get to decide how they influence the public. Do they want to incite a revolt? Do they want to enforce order? Or do they want to stifle rumors? Whoever wins the Influence the Public event is also going to collect 2 war tokens, which will be added to their war camp section, as well as deciding whether or not they want to move the dragon 1 more space. Now, something to note is in order to win the Influence the Public event, players are going to bid leadership. Now, there is no tying bid, and bidding is always going to start with player 1 first, which also means that player 1 is going to have an advantage during the Influence the Public event. The final event on the events track is going to be a battle cry. The battle cry is very straightforward. Each warlord gains 1 leadership. There are some units in the game that can also gain some loyalty or some other effect during a battle cry event. With that said, all of the events on the events track have been briefly explained, and they occur over and over and over again. So after a battle cry, there is a Persuade, Influence the Public, and another battle cry, followed by a Persuade, Influence the Public, and another battle cry, and so on and so forth till we get to the end of game event at the end of the events track. Before moving back to the end of round rules and events, I just want to explain one last bit. Know that all of the events that occur on the events track are always going to get processed in player order, starting with player 1, then player 2, then player 3, and so on. So the next event on the end of round rules and events is going to be a concede. This is a simple question that is posed starting with player 1 as to whether or not they choose to concede. If they do, all the remaining players in the game are going to get 1 war token. The next end of round rule and event is Upkeep. During Upkeep, this is the moment where players must pay for each unit's listed upkeep cost or have their upkeep costs be skipped by paying either 1 loyalty or 1 leadership. Now, if there's a unit anywhere on the initiative table that has its initiative table ID piece flipped over, revealing its disabled size, they do not pay an upkeep. Their upkeep cost is effectively skipped for this round. Next is buy loyalty on the end of round rules and events. Now, buying loyalty is also based on upkeep, in that each player can decide for each of their existing units that are currently deployed, regardless of whether they are disabled or enabled, they can buy them additional loyalty at the expense of double that particular unit's current upkeep cost. Next is exchange leadership. This is where warlords can leverage their loyal units and build up some additional leadership in the process. The way this is handled is players collect 3 loyalty amongst any of their units and generate 1 leadership for every 3 loyalty that they exchange. And this can be collected from any number of their units. They could select 3 of their units and gather 1 loyalty each to gain 1 leadership, or they can gather, for example, 6 loyalty that's on 1 unit and exchange that for 2 leadership. Moving on, we have remove Warbanner. As I said earlier, if there is a Warbanner present beside any of the settlements, that Warbanner is going to prevent that particular settlement from gaining any more growth, which will hinder any player wanting to level up a war camp to level 6 to achieve victory. So if you would like to remove any player's Warbanner, it's going to cost you 1 leadership to do so. And you could remove more than 1 Warbanner during this event here. You just have to pay more leadership to do so. If you are attempting to remove your own Warbanner from a settlement, then it's going to cost you 3 leadership instead, because you are essentially renegotiating the terms of your relationship with that particular settlement that you previously assaulted. The end of this round effects is where players are going to clean up any of the black tokens that are present on top of units' battle map ID pieces on the battle map itself. So this is just a simple reminder to clean up any of this round effects. A this round effect is any ability that has an effect that is ongoing and lasts for 1 game round. This is the moment where those effects get cleaned up. At the end of every game round, all of the disabled units are going to be flipped and enabled. During this event, you simply take all of the pieces that are showing their disabled side, whether they be on the initiative table or on the battle map, you flip those over, they will then become enabled and be able to act on the next game round. One special caveat is that if there are any units that are present on the unit recall column, they will be forced to be disabled, and their battle map pieces will also remain disabled regardless of whether or not a flip and enable event occurs. Finally, the current turn indicator has reached the start new round. We just move the current turn indicator all the way to the start section, and now we proceed with starting a brand new game round, and we're going to repeat this cycle over and over again until there is a winner.